Om Agyanatvanandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Vrajana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakans Vitam Scha Hey Krishna Karna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Prishubhanu Siddhadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kapa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patidanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pranityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today is the disappearance day of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And I'm just going to read this verse. Famous verse from the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is in the Adi Leela of the Chaitanya Charitamrita also. Text number, the first chapter, text number 46. Charimamu vidaniyam navamartyeta karichit namartya buddhya suyeta Sarvadeva Mayo Guru. Is there someone translating? So, okay. So it's chapter 1 of the Adi Leela, Spiritual Masters, text 46. Actually, it's a long verse, so I'm just going to summarize it. Long purport. So in Prabhupada's purport, he goes over that Krishna is talking to Uddhava in the 11th canto about the spiritual master. This doesn't stay up, so if you do that. So the spiritual master is declared to be an acharya, and generally he educates the student just like a father educates his son. That he's not supposed to be an enjoyer of the resources offered by his disciple. Instead, he's supposed to bring his disciple to spiritual maturity. That, generally speaking, he takes candidates who are capable of being elevated from the lowest platform to the highest platform, from a Shudra to a Brahman. Obviously, anyone less than a Shudra, he doesn't accept, because anything less than a Shudra has no chance of elevation. But the whole idea of accepting spiritual initiation is that the spiritual master teaches one how to go from a Shudra, one who's in the bodily concept of life, to the concept of life of being Krishna's eternal servant, realizing oneself as Krishna's eternal servant. So, as Prabhupada writes, it is out of intense compassion that Krishna appears as the spiritual master. and that it's worthwhile to take shelter of such a steady devotee. In other words, generally the spiritual master is chosen from those who are on the Mahabhagavat platform. That is, they're actually in the spiritual world with Krishna, and they're only appearing in the material world in order to help elevate the conditioned souls to their original consciousness. But sometimes, at least, they should be nishta. They should be steadily engaged in Krishna service. They should be liberated. And on the lower platform than that, at least they should be acting on the liberated platform. Even if one is not liberated, but if one is acting on this liberated platform, which means, generally speaking, to serve Krishna out of love, rather than with material interest. At least during service to Krishna, give up the attachment to material interest, and to cooperate with the devotees, to help elevate the devotees, to serve the devotees by helping them become Krishna conscious, and to identify the innocent and present Krishna consciousness in such a way as to help them take up the process of devotional service. The difference between the innocent and the demons, or the non-devout, whatever, the demons, those who are dvitsatsu, those who are envious of Krishna, because everyone is envious of Krishna. But to speak of Krishna, everyone in this material world is envious of everything. Anyone who's better than they are, they're immediately, instead of feeling joyful, the conditioned soul feels depressed. Oh, he's better than I am, or she's better than I am. They have more wealth, more beauty, more fame, more renunciation, more strength. Instead of feeling joyful, then one becomes depressed. So that's a sign of enviousness. So enviousness is the natural consciousness of the conditioned soul, and the spiritual master is supposed to be on the platform of nishta. On that platform there's no enviousness, because one sees all living entities as spiritual beings. And one sees that the external opulences that one is manifesting are actually Krishna. And because the liberated soul is not envious of Krishna, therefore he is not envious of anyone. Or at least one should act on that liberated platform. That, on the other hand, one who poses himself as an acharya, but doesn't have the appropriate service attitude towards the Supreme Lord, then he's considered an offender, a pretender, an imitator. And then, therefore he's disqualified to be an actual acharya. It is not that if one gives initiation, that one becomes an acharya. But if one is actually acharya, then he's actually qualified to be guru. When he's actually a liberated soul, then he's qualified to be a guru. As mentioned before, the disciple always respects the spiritual master as a manifestation of Sri Krishna. So that's necessary for the neophyte devotee to learn the attitude of service. If we don't see anyone in this world as worthy of our service, then we can't make any progress, because we have to develop an attitude, at least, of service. It's the attitude of service that helps develop our Krishna consciousness. After all, bhakti is love. If we don't love anyone, then how can we develop bhakti? But that love should be given appropriately. In other words, one should be trained how to recognize who to give love to and how to give love to them. Or service. Love is with service, mentally, emotionally, etc., etc. But at least love can be manifested in the form of service. And therefore, Srila Rupa Goswami says that there are different ways of displaying love, like offering prasadam and accepting prasadam. So that's more on the physical platform. revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidentially, which is more on the intellectual platform, and accepting gifts and offering gifts, which is more or less on the emotional platform. So one should learn how to apply these loving exchanges to those who are more elevated than we are, then they become a guru. So it's not that my initiating guru is my only guru. That actually the initiating guru is one kind of guru, and he's supposed to teach his disciples how to recognize all the other gurus. Anyone else who's higher than me, more advanced than me in some aspect of devotional service, at least in that aspect becomes my guru. He can teach me, or she can teach me, how to advance in that aspect. If they're higher than me in some aspect of devotional service, and I don't recognize them as guru, then either I'm in ignorance or I'm envious. If I see that they're better than I am, I become envious, then I become an offender, and then by that attitude, I become degraded. It doesn't matter who I have as my spiritual master. I become degraded by my own personal attitude towards others, especially other devotees. It's not that my spiritual master, because I'm initiated, if we're some kind of defense against offenses. But actually we get the results of exactly what our mentality is, not according to our so-called initiation. That if one is actually initiated and takes shelter of one's initiating spiritual master in disciple succession, takes shelter of the instructions, then one of the most important instructions is that one learns how to appreciate and serve devotees who are on a higher level than oneself. Otherwise, what is the use of all the instructions? If the instructions don't lead me to loving the other devotees appropriately, then what is the value of all these, of any instructions I'm following? Indeed, what is the value of my chanting the holy name if I'm committing offenses against devotees? Then the holy name cannot help me either. Just like when Durvasa Muni offended Ambarish Maharaj, even Lord Vishnu couldn't help Durvasa Muni. And for those who are on the same level, the attitude should be of cooperation, rather than being the envious attitude of competition. Cooperation is the basis of love, which we learn from superior devotees. One of the things we learn from superior devotees is how to cooperate with those on the same level for the mission of Krishna. And the opposite of that is enviousness, and that manifested as mundane competition. Who can be better? And for the innocent, then there's kripa. We're taught by the superior devotees how to give kripa to the devotees. And the opposite of that enviousness, is we neglect them. We neglect innocent people, and we simply are involved in our own personal, fulfilling our own personal desires. If one neglects innocent people, then one must certainly be hard-hearted. And if one decides that he's going to take association and admires materialistic people, then that enviousness is against Krishna, because all materialistic people are envious against Krishna, and even they're manifesting good qualities or expertise, it's all in competition to the Supreme Lord. It's all in a state of forgetfulness, for materialistic people at least. And the opposite of that is to neglect them. The devotional side of that is to neglect them and not try to encourage, and not get into arguments with them or get into their association, and encourage them in their non-devotional activities. In any case, the spiritual master is supposed to be expert in these loving exchanges and how to apply them appropriately, and therefore he teaches his disciples. Now in the end of this purport, Prabhupada says, the real Vedic philosophy is Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, which establishes everything to be the simultaneously one with and different from the personality of Godhead. Srila Raghunath Das Goswami confirms that this is the real position of a bona fide spiritual master, and says that one should always think of the spiritual master in terms of his intimate relationship with Mukunda, Shri Krishna. Srila Jiva Goswami in his Bhakti Sandarbha has clearly explained that a pure devotee's observation of the spiritual master and of Lord Shiva as being one with the personality of Godhead exists in terms of their being very dear to the Lord, not identical with him in all respects. Following the footsteps of Srila Raghunath Das Goswami and Srila Jiva Goswami, later acharyas like Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur have confirmed the same truths. In his prayers to the spiritual master, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur confirms that all the revealed scriptures accept the spiritual master to be identical with the personality of Godhead, because he is very dear and confidential servant to the Lord. Gaudiya Vaishnavas therefore worship Srila Gurudev, the spiritual master, in the light of his being the servitor of the personality of Godhead. In all the ancient literatures of devotional service and in the more recent songs of Srila Narottam Das Thakur, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and other unalloyed Vaishnavas, the spiritual master is always considered either one of the confidential associates of Srimati Radharani or a manifested representative of Srila Nityananda Prabhu. So these are very high positions. These are positions of being a confidential associate of Srimati Radharani or a manifested representative of Srila Nityananda. So these are reserved for the Mahabhagavatas who have actually come to the platform of self-realization, full prema bhakti. On the other hand, everyone has to have some kind of guru, even Rishabdev says, Gurur na sasyat, Swajano na sasyat, Pita na sasyat, Swajano na sasyat, Gurur na sasyat, Janani na sasyat, Mamochya yakupaiti mrityum. That one should not become a father, a mother, one should not become a relative, one should not become a teacher, one should not become a guru, one should not become a father and mother unless he's prepared to deliver his dependents from the cycle of birth and death. So it's not that only the initiating guru is actually acting as a representative of Krishna. That proper father, a proper mother, proper teacher, proper relative, everyone is obliged to act as Krishna's representative and assist their dependents to make advances in spiritual life. That's what society is meant for. Unfortunately, we've taken birth as demons in a demoniac society, devoid of any kind of, well, for the most part, devoid of any spiritual knowledge, although there may be some religiosity, which has kept society from becoming completely animalistic. But in general, there's a lack of understanding of what one's roles are. And therefore, we have also been imperfectly trained and living in a society which has imperfect understanding of what its roles are. Therefore, it's hard to fit together how you can have an acharya like Srila Prabhupada and at the same time have many other devotees, everyone having their role to play for only one reason. There's only one purpose of society, Yari Deka Tarikaha Krishna Upadesh Amaya Aga Guruhana Taridesh. Whoever we meet, it is our duty to help everyone, somehow or another, all living entities, try to make advancement in spiritual life. It is not that only the guru, the initiating guru, or the sannyasi, or someone in some position has that obligation. That is everyone's obligation. If we don't fulfill that obligation, then we become under the influence of the illusory energy. And it's only when we're actually remembering that service and we're performing it one way or another that we come under the influence of the superior spiritual energy. But there are different roles. And that role, if one is taking the role of a spiritual master for the disciple, then that role is to train the disciple how to recognize and properly honor all living entities. And how to serve all living entities appropriately by, in some way or another, when possible, helping them advance in Krishna consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada was a person, not only a person, but he was a devotee who understood everything perfectly. As it says in the next verse, he was on the absolute platform. And therefore he recognized all the elements of a real society. He understood how society was supposed to be organized in such a way as to actually make it as easy as possible to go back to the spiritual world, that everyone would know what their service would be to help others make spiritual advancement. The mother would take care of the children, not that she would understand her role was to bring her child up to become a devotee of Krishna. Like Suniti taught Dhruva Maharaj that you should go, if you go to the forest, you should look for Krishna. So she perfectly fulfilled her role as mother. Similarly, we find the teachers like Garga Muni as a spiritual master, telling about Balaram and Krishna's future and how Nanda Maharaj should act as a proper parent and bring up Krishna and Balaram in Krishna consciousness. And Nanda Maharaj and Jasoda naturally were very inclined towards Krishna consciousness, having Krishna and Balaram as their children. Similarly, we find that others, either they took up the role properly or they took it up improperly. We have Sananda and Amarika, the teachers of Prahlad Maharaj teaching them the wrong thing. We have Hiranyakashipu exemplifying the wrong kind of parent. So these examples are there in a scripture, and when one can see the good example and the bad example, can help the students make progress towards understanding their role in the society and eventually in a spiritual society, so they can fulfill that role and make spiritual advancement. That's especially the job of Lord Nityananda. Very simple. Simply, he went door to door with Haridas Thakur, and he told everyone that Bolo Krishna, Bhaja Krishna, Koro Krishna Shika. As Prabhupada said, it's not very difficult to become a spiritual master. You don't have to sit on a higher seat. You don't even have to sit. We simply have to repeat the message of Lord Krishna as Lord Nityananda was doing. Tell people, chant Hare Krishna, worship Krishna, and follow his instructions. And then one becomes a spiritual master. Any glorification, any assets that are given as the role of whatever a spiritual master may have, these are not very significant. The significance is actually when we're sincerely trying to serve Krishna in that way, then Krishna blesses us from inside and reveals spiritual knowledge to us. That's the actual gift. That's the actual asset that we're looking for. Not external recognition and material opulence. The real benefit is the internal awakening of Krishna consciousness, awareness of and love for Krishna, eternally. So Srila Prabhupada, as an actual manifestation of Lord Nityananda's mercy, came to the Western world, and as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, one can understand a Mahabhagavat by his ability to convert many others and to become Vaishnavas. So, Prabhupada, at least, he started many devotees on the path of becoming Vaishnavas. As one person once asked Srila Prabhupada, that, can you show us the mystic powers? And Prabhupada said, well, actually I have no mystic powers, but if you want to see my mystic powers, he pointed out his disciples and he said, this is my mystic power. Previously they were engaged in all kinds of sinful activity, but now they've become mad after God, after the love of God. Previously they didn't know about God, they rejected God, they were engaged in so many sinful activities, but now they've become mad after God. He said, that's my mystic power. Now, it's not that Prabhupada has disappeared. Prabhupada is still present, as it says, he reasons ill who thinks that Vaishnavas die, for thou art living still and sound, that Vaishnavas die to live, and living spread the holy name around. So it's not that Prabhupada disappeared and he's not available, that he was here some years ago and some people had his association. Surely, due to some devotees' previous pious or Krishna conscious activities, they got to meet Prabhupada personally and serve him or take initiation from him, etc., etc. But it's not that there's any less potency nowadays in getting Prabhupada's association. For instance, Prabhupada is actually here in the temple in the form of his deity. It's not that this is just an ordinary deity, just like the deities on the altar. We may think, due to our materialistic conceptions and being covered over by the illusory energy, we may think that this is just a statue. Just like we may think that Gaur Nitai on the altar are just statues. Or there may be something there and it's Krishna, but it's inconceivable exactly how Krishna is working. But actually it's, as the Brahmin told in the story of Shakshi Gopal, he said that you're directly the son of Nanda Maharaj. It's not that you're some kind of representative of Nanda Maharaj, the son of Nanda Maharaj Krishna, but actually you're directly. And you must come as a witness. But Shakshi Gopal said, well, I can't come as a witness because I'm a deity, and deities can't walk. So the Brahmin said, well, if you can talk, you can walk. So he said, that sounds pretty logical, so I guess I'll have to come. At the festival of Kaitori, when Janavi Devi Dasi was there with the other Vaishnavas, like I guess Jiva Goswami, then it is said that the deities actually came off the altar and joined in the Harina and the Kirtan. Now we may believe that or may not believe it. Matter of fact, we have a hard time even believing that we're not this body. So what to speak of these other things? But the fact is that if we serve with the proper understanding, and that's coming from Prabhupada's books, then the result is that the deity and Prabhupada, either within our heart or in their form, for instance, Prabhupada will actually talk to us and give us instructions. But that depends upon our faith. If we act as if they're statues, then of course they'll remain statues for us. And if we act as if they're actually there, and that we're serving them with devotion, then the result is that they reciprocate with us. Just as when Prabhupada is here, that according to one's mentality, Prabhupada reciprocated. It's not that when Krishna was here, it is not that everyone understood Krishna, but everyone understood Krishna according to their mentality. Krishna reciprocated with them. Prabhupada said only a few people actually knew who Krishna was when he appeared. The residents of Vrindavan, the Pandavas, etc. Others, they took him in different ways. So similarly, this opportunity that we have we haven't lost any opportunity. As a matter of fact, when Srila Prabhupada was here, many devotees may have took him for granted. Of course, Prabhupada was very expert at reciprocation with devotees, and therefore he was able to establish the Hare Krishna movement, not on the basis of some materialistic expertise, but on the basis of loving exchanges that Prabhupada was able to have with the devotees. Whether he was cooking prasadam and serving it to them, or he was explaining Krishna consciousness to them, or due to whatever the pious activities that the devotees had, and due to the influence that Prabhupada had by being in the spiritual world, as Vidura said, or as Maharaj Yudhisthira told Vidura when he came back from pilgrimage, Bhavan Vidas Bhagavatas Tirtha Bhutak Swayam Vivo Tirtha Korvanti Tirthani Swantak Stena Gita Britaha. The saints like yourself, they're verily holy places of pilgrimage, because wherever you go, you carry the Lord within your heart, and therefore that place becomes a place of pilgrimage. So Prabhupada was actually bringing the spiritual world. I remember one time I went to Boston in 1969 with the devotees in the temple that I was staying in Buffalo. First we went to New York City and we had a Harinam there. And then we went to Boston for the opening of the Boston Temple and the opening of the book printing. Prabhupada's book I guess it was the BBT, but it was more or less I forget what they call it, the book printing press, press, ISKCON press. They had bought a printing machine. They put it in the Boston Temple, and Prabhupada was they bought this temple on Beacon Street, and Prabhupada was going to visit for the first time. And we were in this temple had 2 stories, which was unusual. 2 big stories. The top story was just a big temple room. And I think some devotees went to the airport to greet Prabhupada. I stayed on the 2nd floor with the devotees who were doing bhajan. And suddenly I saw that Gaur Nitai, the picture of Gaur Nitai with their hands out like this. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has his hands like this. The kirtan party is in the back. And he started to glow. He started to become effulgent. And then I saw Prabhupada walking up the steps to the temple room on the 2nd floor, and the whole room turned into Vaikuntha. Not only for myself, but I could imagine for all the other devotees in the room also. That was due to the fact that Prabhupada was actually bringing the spiritual world wherever he went, and to different degrees we were able to realize it, experience it. And that was a lecture Prabhupada gave, which was not recorded, that I know of. It was simply one story after another about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. So I never saw that lecture recorded for some reason. Maybe it was, I don't know. In any case, I was also with Prabhupada at times where I saw that devotees definitely didn't recognize Prabhupada's position, and they acted accordingly, probably due to familiarity. So this idea that if we would have been back in those days, and if we would have gotten Prabhupada's personal association, then spiritual advancement would have been very easy, and we would have been exalted souls now. Maybe, probably not. Matter of fact, most of the devotees I knew who had direct association with Prabhupada, when they had it too much, not all of them, but some of them, when they had too much association with Prabhupada, they became familiar and offensive, and they developed all kinds of incorrect ideas about who Prabhupada was and what his position was. And they started to have imaginary ideas about their own position. And then afterwards, instead of following Prabhupada's footsteps and emphasizing service and separation to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement, the idea of how much personal association you had with Prabhupada was a criteria of how much you became a leader and an important devotee within ISKCON. Which was obviously not, hopefully we've understood that that's not a very accurate assessment, because everyone has an equal opportunity, even right now, to get personal association with Prabhupada by the correct method of remembering his instructions and serving them. That's how they actually get the most intimate association with Prabhupada. And in that association, then one will actually see that Prabhupada, one will realize that Prabhupada is always associating with his spiritual master through his service to the parampara, and his spiritual master is associating with his spiritual master through service to the parampara, and his spiritual master, etc., all the way back to the 6 Goswamis who have given us the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it's not that just any spiritual master, but those who are actually carrying the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu from the 6 Goswamis, and ultimately serving this Panchatattva and their feelings of separation from Radha and Krishna and their associates in Vrindavan. So that's the orders that are coming down through Prabhupada, through our disciple succession. And if we take Prabhupada's book seriously, and we appreciate those who, as much as any devotee has some understanding of what that mission is and is engaged in it seriously, give some appreciation and some service to such devotees appropriately, then the result should be that we develop a constant meditation and appreciation, not only for our initiating spiritual master, or from others who are instructing us, but we're able to see how Prabhupada is manifested in all the activities of all the devotees, wherever they may be in our society, those who are actually following Prabhupada's instructions as given to them by bona fide representatives of Prabhupada, and be able to see how Prabhupada is acting through them to maintain and develop this Krishna consciousness movement and our Krishna consciousness. Then, the more we see that, the more we work accordingly, then the more Prabhupada we become a better and better representative of Prabhupada and experience his divine potencies that he's carrying with him as a pure representative of the disciple succession. And whatever was experienced by the devotees in their association with Prabhupada in the past, we can experience now. And whatever the devotees are experiencing now in association with Prabhupada, we can also get that experience, as Prabhupada was always with his spiritual master. So we can always be with our spiritual master, and through our spiritual master become associated with all the other acharyas in our disciple succession, and ultimately with the 6 Goswamis and the Panchatattva, and this way become eligible to get the association to actually enter into the spiritual world. Not only after leaving this body, but even in this body. So that's available to us if we want to take it. Of course, we could tell so many pastimes about Prabhupada, because they're unlimited. There's so many pastimes about Prabhupada, and they're all very valuable. But even more valuable than just hearing about how the devotees saw Prabhupada when he was here, which we can remember, and that's equally spiritually powerful now to remember those pastimes with the right understanding and attitude. But we should also participate in the spreading the Krishna consciousness movement now, in the present. Try to apply what Prabhupada started, which means Prabhupada didn't just come and do pastimes, or even just have relations with devotees. He wanted us to do something practical, like spreading Krishna consciousness to others. Prabhupada said our movement is meant for two things. One is to spread the holy name, and the second is to create the atmosphere by which people will be able to take advantage of the holy name. So that means, spread the holy name means books, prasadam, the holy name itself, and the atmosphere means gurukul, farm projects, cultural revolution with art and music, all meant to convince people that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to engage everyone's talents, abilities, and energies in the service of a spiritual revolution. And if we're thinking like that, then we'll get all of Prabhupada's blessings, and each one of us can associate very intimately with Prabhupada and understand his actual glories. Rather than hearing about his glories from others, we can actually experience them directly for ourselves. Of course, if we hear the glories from others, we should be able to experience them for ourselves also. It's not that Prabhupada manifested his glories for one devotee or two devotees. He manifested those glories. Krishna manifested Prabhupada's glories for all of us, for all the time. But we have to learn how to take advantage of them and go on with the mission. And it's a complete mission. It's not just a little mission. If we actually going to serve Prabhupada fully, then we're going to have to create a full society. And if we think little, then we'll stay little. And if we think big, as we try to do, create the big society that Prabhupada wanted, the complete society, the complete Krishna conscious society, then we'll be able to become a proper instrument, and we'll get the full blessings of our Prabhupada and the Acharyas, and then our life will actually become wonderful. And through them, we'll be able to do something actually wonderful for this, to save the society. All these problems that are going on, whether it's the pandemic or other things, is all due to the lack of our movement spreading Krishna consciousness. But that's all right. That's because we were born fools and rascals, and we continue to be fools and rascals. But we don't have to stay like that. If we actually, fortunately, there's some, we've come here to honor Srila Prabhupada on his Disappearance Day, because we don't want to stay fools and rascals. We want to become actual proper instruments to actually serve this mission and change this hellish society. Or as Prabhupada said, that the society will go down as saving the world in its darkest hour. ISKCON will go down, saving the world in its darkest hour. So it's getting pretty dark. I don't think we should start waiting for the darkest hour, because then someone's going to have to come and save us. So whatever we can understand, whatever we can apply, let's try to do that in Prabhupada's service. Try to understand the value of reading Prabhupada's books and taking shelter of them and applying them, and try to improve a little bit every day, to become a little bit more serious, a little bit more applying So we can actually change the direction of this world's misdirected society. Not only this world's misdirected society, maybe we help improve our own society too. Before we start changing everyone else's society, try to help out our own society. Try to make our society a little bit more spiritual, the relationships a little bit more loving, a little bit more intelligently done, to help organize ourselves a little bit better, to do our mission a little bit better. And then probably we'll be pleased when we simply make an effort in the right direction. And then Krishna will give us the intelligence to make further and further progress, if that's what we want. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions? Do we have is this being recorded, or is, when devotees ask questions, how does that go on the recording?
The microphone is strong enough to catch all of it.
Oh, okay. Ooh. Be careful what you think.
Maybe you can summarize the question.
If it's powerful enough, there's no problem.
It's not actually.
Okay, if it's not.
Sit here, it's strong enough.
Yeah, but if you go back, okay. Any questions? Yes.
Is there such a thing as a guru who is with both feet in the material world, one who is 1 foot in the spiritual and one in the material, and one who is with both feet in the spiritual world? There is this some idea that I've been hearing in this.
Well, that's what one of our Srila Maharaj mentioned that one time from the Gaudiya Math. Yeah, that's also in Prabhupada's purport, one purport. He said a neophyte devotee and an intermediate devotee can also accept disciples. Such disciples should also be on the same level and should be understood that they can't advance very well due to his insufficient guidance. Therefore, one should be careful to accept an Uttama Adhikari as one's spiritual master. So there are different levels of initiating gurus, or even spiritual masters, initiating or diksha or shiksha gurus. But that doesn't mean that, just like for instance, if you're playing a game like soccer, I guess soccer is appropriate here, because they play soccer in Croatia, I think. So it's not that if one is a professional soccer player, every time they kick the ball, it goes into the goal. Every time he kicks the ball is perfect. And if you're going to learn soccer, you're only going to learn soccer from one who always kicks the ball into the hole. Generally, there are no such soccer players who are so perfect. Therefore, we're going to learn the game of soccer, or even appreciate it. Those who are more expert than we are, we learn from them. If we're 1 year old, or 5 years old, and our father wants to teach us how to kick the ball, we don't say, my dear father, you're not a professional, I'm not going to learn from you. I'm going to wait till I grow up and then I'll start learning. So for ourselves, when we're in the darkness of ignorance, anyone who has a match is illuminated. They may not have the sun, carrying the sun with them, but even if they have a match, they can illuminate us. So this sentimental idea that the spiritual master, especially the initiating guru, has to be a Mahabhagavat, and only if he's a Mahabhagavat, I'm going to follow his instructions. That was an idea, an erroneous idea, that came out of misunderstanding what the role of the spiritual master is. Now the Mahabhagavad, as Prabhupada explains in the Nectar of Instruction, before he gets into what I just quoted, he said a Mahabhagavat is one who's understood his own identity, who's realized it. So that's on at least the Bhava platform. He's an Uttama Adhikari. And at the same time, he knows that there's no difference between Krishna and Krishna's name. That's also on the Mahabhagavad platform. And at the same time, he has no interest in doing anything but spreading the holy name. So such a devotee should be accepted as a Mahabhagavad, and everything one has should be offered to him. Especially the brahmacharis who beg from door to door, they should offer everything to such a bona fide spiritual master. But if one is actually not a Mahabhagavad, but he imitates a Mahabhagavad, then he's certainly he's going to become degraded. So therefore one should, Prabhupada goes, one should know what the level of others are, what their level of spiritual advancement are. One should know one's own spiritual advancement. And then that comes about. So the worst thing is imitation. In other words, one should not try to pretend or imitate a level of devotee he's actually not on. On the other hand, if we don't understand how every devotee, when they're engaged in Krishna service, is actually acting as a representative of Krishna, then we're also going to make offenses against every level of devotee. If someone comes up to us, just like when Prabhupada was installing the deities in Holland, and there was a TV camera there, and he was giving instructions. And the devotees were quite spaced out, which is to use a colloquialism. They were quite inattentive. They didn't know what they were doing. And Prabhupada started to yell at them. It was being filmed nationally on the television in Holland. And then one hippie came up to Prabhupada and said, "Shanti, Shanti." And Prabhupada picked up his beads and started to chant. Now, how did Prabhupada see this hippie coming up? He saw him as a representative of Krishna in some way. Now, how we see the whole thing, that will be according to our understanding. But Prabhupada understood how everyone was actually representing Krishna in some way and knew how to act appropriately according to the instructions he was receiving. His whole changing from back to Godhead to writing hardcover books came from a colonel in the army, a suggestion from him. So Prabhupada didn't say, "You're a karmi, you're just a colonel in the army. Who are you to tell me what to do, how I write my books, how I distribute Krishna consciousness?" But Prabhupada took it as a good idea coming from Krishna. So what to speak of those who are engaged in devotional service and those who are actually repeating the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in disciple succession and have experience, much more experience than we do, then certainly they're much more likely to be an instrument for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his service. And if we serve those instructions, then we make spiritual advancement. Even if that devotee is not perfectly on the spiritual platform, if we serve those instructions, then we'll come onto the spiritual platform. It's our attitude of service towards the devotees that helps us advance in spiritual life. If we criticize others' attitudes, it may not be wrong. We should know who has what attitude according to our best ability. But we should always have the right attitude, appropriate attitude. And if we see someone with a better service attitude than we are, or a service attitude, or is instructing us in how to develop a service attitude or instruction, then we should appreciate that and serve them appropriately. And if that devotee is pleased by our service, then we spiritually advance. If that devotee is as a representative of Krishna, is pleased by our service and our service attitude, then we make spiritual advancement. And if they're displeased by our attitude and our service, then that may be offensive. So when we accept the spiritual master, then we accept the best spiritual master we can, and then we serve them as a representative of Krishna. But not as the only representative of Krishna. Through the spiritual master and who's supposed to be representing the instructions of his spiritual master, and in our case, Srila Prabhupada. Then, as a result, by doing that, then we take those instructions to learn how to become a better servant of our disciple succession. And in our disciple succession, Rupa Goswami has instructed us, very importantly, how to learn how to become a servant of all his representatives appropriately. Now, a spiritual master who is more elevated will help us and clarify that that's our duty, to become a better servant of Krishna's servants. And if he's not so elevated, still we can understand by hearing from others that is the duty of the spiritual master, even though he may not clarify it so easily, so directly, or even set such a perfect example in our eyes. But when we understand that, then we should follow it. And then we'll make spiritual advancement ourselves. And if we become so qualified, we become a pure devotee, then we'll help bring our own spiritual masters to the spiritual world too. So it's not our duty just to blindly follow our initiating guru. It's our duty to understand what the instructions are coming from disciple succession, including our initiating guru's instructions and explanations, but understand things completely. And for that, part of that is taking help of all the other gurus, instructing gurus within our society, so that we can fully understand those words that are coming in disciple succession. Even if our initiating guru doesn't understand them perfectly, but we can understand them perfectly with the help of all the other gurus we have. He may understand them perfectly, he may not understand them perfectly, but it's our job to understand them perfectly. And the guru, initiating guru, and all our shiksha gurus are meant to help us understand it perfectly. Because after all, it's our duty to go back to the spiritual world, to come to full Krishna consciousness. And everyone else is helping us do that to different degrees, in different ways. Anything else? Okay, time out.